Okay, hi everyone. This will be a relatively quick tutorial. I want to show you how you might make like wireframe diagrams of your exhibition. This is a pretty common thing people might ask for if they want a plan of how you're going to install your exhibition and they want diagrams that could have measurements on them. Doing like wireframe renders where you could add dimensions is a pretty common thing to do. But there's a couple of things that I'll show you. So these are some I did. You know, here I've got like a top view, a side view, and then a front view. And you can see they're wireframe. They've also got an alpha channel, so it's a line drawing with a transparent background. So you could put that on a white background or invert it, put it on a black background, whatever you want. So let's jump in. Okay, so what I've got here is three cameras, orthographic cameras set up, and this is where I've been taking my renders from. But I'll take my file back to where yours is probably up to, and I'll walk you through it. Okay, so when we last spoke, your file was probably something like this. You know, we'd added lights and some of the air conditioning units and the fireplaces and so on. So let's add these cameras. So first of all, I'm going to hide a little bit of my architecture. I'll hide all that stuff from the ceiling. That's just going to be distracting. I'll hide. I'll hide. I'm just going to delete that old camera. I'm going to hide this thing called lights cameras, and I'm actually just going to call this lights because I'll put my cameras in a separate collection because I do want my cameras. So I'll turn off my lights. That's probably okay. All right, so now I'll just quickly make a new collection and let's go on in here, put in the scene, and I'll call it cameras. Okay, and I'll turn it on. And I will first of all just start adding these cameras. We're just going to make some renders of this back room here. So I'll go Shift A, add a camera. And the camera will have gone wherever my 3D cursor is, which is here. That's where my 3D cursor was. All right, so first of all, let's just look at the transforms of the camera by pressing N to bring up the side panel, go to the item. First of all, I'll reset the rotations, and I'm just going to rotate it on the X-axis by 90 degrees. So we're going to look across this way. Let's look from the front. And I'll just bring it down so it's looking in front of the building. I'm going to create a new view panel here by just dragging from the top corner, and I will view this camera. I'll look through that camera, and this one I'll use just to position the camera. Okay, so a few things. First of all, we're going to play around with the viewport here. There's a few different ways to make wireframe renders in Blender. I'll show you two ways in this tutorial. I'll show you what I think is one of the fastest, and then I'll show you another version where you can make vector renders, which you might need if you're, I don't know, somebody asks for an SVG or something like that. Okay, let's do the quick version. So in my viewport overlays here, I'm just going to untick pretty much everything, and I'm just going to leave on wireframe. Okay, so now I can see my wireframe, and then I'm going to put my viewer in wireframe. If I move the camera like GX along, you'll see it doesn't look correct for an architectural drawing because we have perspective. We're still seeing the perspective of this room. Instead, we want an orthographic camera. So I'll go into my camera settings here and just set it from perspective to orthographic. And now we've got that kind of architectural view where we have no perspective. We've got a purely like two-dimensional view. Next thing, I'm going to adjust the height. I might just maybe put it at like 1.5. I can also adjust, you'll notice if I press G and Y and I move the camera, it doesn't change the view at all here. And that's because we don't have perspective. Instead, we need to use this orthographic scale. So I'll choose a scale like 7.5, seems to look pretty good. I'll move it on the X-axis. That looks fine. Okay, so let's just set up the other two cameras, one for the top, one for the front. So let's name this one ortho_side, and I'll just put it in the cameras collection. I'm going to duplicate it, Shift D, left click, and first of all, let's just rotate it on the x-axis 90 degrees. And I'm just going to grab it, pop it approximately in position. We're still at the same height, so that's good. I just want to make sure I'm sort of getting everything here, so I'm just going to look through that camera view, cameras, set active as camera. I think the scale here might be a little small, so I'm going to change the scale on both of them. Let's go back, let's go up to like 8, maybe even 8.5. I just want to make sure I'm getting the whole room. GY, that looks good. So I'm going to change this one also to 8.5. And I just want them at the same scale so that once I have all these renders, I can, you know, line them up, and say you wanted to have them properly aligned so that the front and side and top views you can track your measurements down. It's good to render them at the same scale. Okay, so I'll just duplicate this again, Shift D, rotate this time on the y-axis. We're going to rotate that by, I guess, set that to 0. And we're going to move this one up. Doesn't really matter how high it is because the orthographic scale would take care of that. And let's look through that camera, view cameras, set active as camera. And I'm just going to GX and move it till we've framed the whole room. Okay, I'm going to make that scale a little bit bigger again. Now, because we've got the duplication, it's good because it means these two cameras are aligned, but I'm just going to make them all, I think, 10, just so we're definitely getting all of the room in there. Okay, now I'll just rename these. This one is Ortho Top, and this one, let's call it Ortho Front. Okay, so now to rendering. We're already getting a wireframe here, but if I render at the moment, we won't get that. We'll probably get absolutely nothing because I've turned my lights off. Makes sense. Okay, so a couple of things we're going to do. We're just going to go into the render tab, go into the film tab, click transparent to make sure we keep our transparent background. And then this is a funny little trick. You can actually go view viewport render image, and it will just render the settings from your viewport. And in this case, we've got our wireframe image. The resolution's not great for a wireframe, so this is the one downside of not using a vector image. But we can always like up the resolution a little bit if we need it. Here I can just multiply by 2 and multiply by 2. So now this would be like a 4K image. You can do effects like anti-aliasing or other things probably in your compositor, I guess. But let's just have another look at that. Oops, not render image. We want viewport render. I'll just wait for that to finish. It should give me a completely black image. Yep. No, let's just go now. Viewport render image. Okay, and there's our image. And we can image, save as, and when you save it, just make sure you're saving as a PNG with RGB A. A is the alpha channel that will keep that transparent background. If you do RGB, it'll compress it down to either a black or a white background. Okay, so there's your image. And then basically you just need to switch cameras. So here I can go view, cameras, set active object as camera. There's my front and view, viewport render image. There's my front view. It's pretty quick, pretty straightforward. Obviously, just to complete things, we can, did I do it for the top before? Can't remember. View, I'll have to look through this camera. So view, cameras, set active object as camera, view, viewport render image. There we go. Okay, pretty straightforward. So that would give us 3 orthographic images. The final way I'll show you is if you want to make vector images, which, whoops, I don't need to do that. I don't need to look through that camera. And here, I've just accidentally rotated my camera. I did not mean to do that. Okay, so let's just set all those back to 0. And I believe we had, okay, yeah, that's better. That's where I wanted my camera. Okay, let's make this a vector image. There's a plugin or an add-on in Blender, if we go Edit, Preferences, and Add-ons, I think it's called Freestyle. Free. Okay, maybe I have to get extension perhaps. Freestyle SVG exporter, that's one we want. So I'll just click install. I think that's all I need to do. And does it pop up in my add-ons now? Okay, good, that's enabled. Okay, so the Freestyle SVG exporter is really useful. Vector images are things you can use in design files, laser cutting, anything where instead of a bitmap image, you need vectors, which are, sort of infinitely scalable vector graphics. So to set up our Freestyle, once we've enabled the plugin, you should have this little box down here. Just tick Freestyle SVG Export and Freestyle, and I think there might be another little Freestyle tab here. Yeah, now down in our View Layers. Okay, so there's a whole bunch of different settings you can do here. I'm just going to leave them at the default for now and see what we get. The main thing to know when you're using the Freestyle exporter is where the file is going to go. You actually have to use the output folder here and just point it to, I'll put it in the Orthographics folder. You have to point it somewhere because it's actually going to send an SVG file to that folder. It's not going to be what you see in your render file. Okay, now this might be a little slow. I'll put it back to 1920 by 1080, but actually the Freestyle renderer, it's not really looking so much at resolution. It's, actually I think it is, but it's anyway, it's giving us the output we're getting will be a vector file. But I think there actually is some correlation between the resolution we have here and the vectors it can see. But don't quote me on that. I'll have to look it up. All right, so we've turned on our Freestyle here and here, and I'm just leaving the Freestyle settings here at default down here. But let's see what we get. So if I now go render image, it might take a second. It'll do our regular render, which in this case is all black because I turned my lights off, but it will also give us, you'll see up here it says Freestyle mesh loading, and that will be loading the Freestyle mesh and then doing a calculation and giving us a vector image. It might be a bit messy, I'm just thinking, because some of the assets we used from online might be a little bit heavy in their edges, like the human figure, and I noticed in our vector renders some of the wireframes, like if you look at the chair and the human, they're probably very mesh heavy, so that might make our Freestyle export a little bit slower. But if it was just the architecture edges, it should be pretty quick. So it's still going. I might just pause the video and come back when that's done. Okay, so that's done. And if I look in my folder of where everything's been output, this is the vector image I've got. So you can see that unlike the wireframe, it hasn't hasn't shown us hidden faces, so we might need to go back into the Freestyle settings and adjust a few things, but it's given us an SVG file named after the frame that we were on in our sequence, so named after frame 1. If you're doing multiples, just make sure either you change the frame number or you rename the file, because it'll replace the last one it made if it just makes another file 001. But this is a vector file image, and there's lots of things you can do with it, and it could be useful depending on what you need to do, but we can also discuss that in class. Okay, I just want to have a really quick look at the Freestyle settings. I think some of these things like hidden faces, yeah, here we've got set face to visible. So if you wanted to sort of see everything, we just need to play around with some of these settings if you wanted to see through and so on. But the first method I showed you for basic line vector wireframe renders also works pretty well. This is just an extra that gives you a different data type and something that you may or may not need. Okay, so I'll end the video here and I'll see you all in class. Okay, bye-bye.